Close your eyes. It's after images.
You're listening to After Images, a podcast for cinephiles that takes a deep dive into moving images. Each episode features a special guest who is invited to explore a film of their choice. After Images is hosted by film writers Frank Bouleg and Marisa C. Hayes.
UK-based author of science fiction and fantasy Emily Tesh joins us for an episode dedicated to Peter Jackson's 2001 adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings trilogy. Set in the fictional world of Middle-earth, the film follows the hobbit Frodo Baggins as he and the Company of the Ring set out to destroy the One Ring, an artifact of great magical power, and defeat its maker, the Dark Lord Sauron. Adapting the epic tale from the page to the screen represented a massive endeavor, and the extended film trilogy clocks in at nearly 12 hours. Rich in battles, species, friendships, travels, magics, and adventures of all sorts, the first film of the trilogy sets the stage for the whole saga, introducing the audience to most of the characters, as well as to what's at stake in this fantastic story of friendship.
Emily Tesh is a UK-based author of science fiction and fantasy. Her debut novel, Some Desperate Glory, won the Hugo Award for Best Novel. Tesh is also a winner of the Astounding Award and the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning Green Hollow duology. Emily Tesh, welcome to After Images podcast. We are delighted to have you with us for a discussion of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Good evening. Thank you very, very much for having me here. I think we'll be talking mostly about the Fellowship of the Ring, the trilogy, because I considered doing the whole trilogy and thought, well, it's 9 bloody hours. And I think one thing to talk about with the Lord of the Rings films is how they mark almost the beginning of an era in filmmaking where before these films you were not getting the same 3-hour multi-part, multi-series blockbuster. And I don't think any since has done it quite as well.
And before we jump into that, may I just begin by asking you, what has the film, particularly the first one, meant to you? Have you revisited it regularly since it first came out in cinemas? And also the natural follow-up, which is, have you always been a fan of the books?
I think I will talk about the books quite a lot this evening because I think the film is interesting as adaptation. I have always been a fan of the books. I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 8 years old, which was, I think, let me count. Yeah, it was about 5 years before the first film came out, and I had reread the book at least twice before I ever saw the film. So this was a world that was already deeply in my heart, deeply in my head as a small, very nerdy child. Like many children who read Lord of the Rings, I didn't fully understand it, but I was overwhelmed by it. And the books were so dear to me that I went into the film, I remember as an 11-year-old, ready to criticize, and was swept away nonetheless. And I think the first film is a startling achievement in adaptation of that overwhelming, that epic in the truest sense of the word, mythic feel that can be achieved in cinema as perhaps hardly anywhere else, except maybe in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Were you already familiar with The Hobbit when you read The Lord of the Rings?
Oh yeah, I read that one even earlier. As a small child, my parents were desperately trying to find books long enough to keep me busy, and Lord of the Rings was a really good attempt. It kept me going for a week.
Excellent. And So you were pleased with that adaptation initially as a child, and has that relationship shifted over time when you go back to the film? Are there things that you notice that you didn't quite catch the first time? Is it one of those sort of gem-like moving image projects where you can find something new to appreciate with each and every viewing?
Yes and no. There's more to appreciate and more to criticize, I think, coming to it as an adult. So The Fellowship of the Ring is, firstly, it's a very long film. I said this earlier. They're all very long films. And as an adult, I do actually think 3 hours is too much time to make me sit still. In fact, I'm not sure how 11-year-old me managed it at all. Uh, but coming back to it as an adult, there's much that I still love so much. The score by Howard Shore is exquisite. I think it stands as almost nothing else does in my mind, in my memory. The Here I will be revealed as an amateur and an idiot in the realm of like TV. I have lots of language for talking about books. I cannot talk about film at all. This, is it called the cinematography? The stuff you see is really good. The way you are brought into not just these characters, but this place. And I do think that you can tell that the filmmakers loved the text they were working with, and they understood one of the core things that the text is about, which is about relationships with landscape. And the film is overwhelmingly beautiful in how it treats landscape and how it wants you to love landscape. And it moves through these different landscapes, through the tender greenness of the Shire for almost the entire first half, taking you through the beauty of Rivendell, and then into the grander and more terrible landscapes of the back half of the film. There are also things that I come back to as an adult and I think, not quite. There are adaptational choices which I understand why they were made, but to me have lost some of the spirit of Tolkien. One thing that is very, very central to Tolkien's writing and almost completely absent from, certainly from Fellowship, is his music and poetry. And his poetry in the books is all meant to be sung. And while there is much music in the film, most of it is the music of the score rather than the music of the characters. And I think this misses a trick. And partly I'm just selfish and would quite like somebody better than me at music to set these words that are meant for music. But also I think in a very real way, music is the magic of Tolkien's world. The ability of the different characters to sing and speak their legends and to speak with great voices and to speak these ancient and beautiful words is what gives them the ability to move through the world of the magical and the unseen.
And if I'm correct, actually, music is at the root of the world as created in the Silmarillion, isn't it?
Yes, the Ainulindale, the opening movement of the Silmarillion, is the story of a great song, which is the song of creation itself. And I think many people do not like Tolkien's poetry, which is fair because it's not great. But I do think it occupies a central place in his creative project, and choosing not to adapt it is, I think, losing a piece of the project. In my most recent watch for this podcast, I caught for the first time that it's the ring theme that comes up as they pass the feet of the Argonath, the great gates of the river. I'm like, oh my goodness, because it's Isildur. I had a little moment. But the way the music is actively telling you the story at every moment in the film, which of course is something you cannot do in a book in the same way. And that, I think, is speaking to Tolkien's interest in the power of music. Tolkien is very interested in Englishness. Like one of his core sources is neither Nordic nor Germanic, it's Beowulf. Which is really, really visible in The Hobbit. But in Fellowship especially, he's interested in this move from a quite a contemporary Englishness, or maybe of his childhood. The Shire is a lovely little Oxfordshire, and it exists in kind of a weird technological pocket in Middle Earth where they have fairly like not modern technology, because Tolkien is anti-modernist, but they have, water wheels, and somehow they've got the technological know-how to do some quite elaborate cloth work because everybody's wearing really nice waistcoats. And the costume work is so lovely. But Tolkien's world and the world of the Fellowship moves from that nostalgic English countryside through time and is constantly looping through time into worlds of heroic myth and legendary myth. And this sense of like moving from understandable time to like an incomprehensible deep time, I think is very beautifully done in the film. I think the way they use the landscape and decorate the landscape, like that sequence where they pass the great statues on the river, is spectacular.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I know that sometimes fans of the book have been a bit critical of the relationship to time, which may have been a necessary evil for creating a sense of continuity in the space of the film compared to how time unfolds in the book. So that seems a very nice connection.
Yeah, I mean, they completely dispose of Tolkien's very carefully worked out timeline, but I suppose they couldn't keep Elijah Wood hanging around with 17 years to age, as Frodo does in the opening chapters of Lord of the Rings. And this would not have been practical. They would have had to release the film, 2018?
Yeah.
Wouldn't do at all.
Yeah. But to continue talking about time and also what you said concerning landscape, those two elements, geography and time, are so important both in the book, I think, and in the film. I think you talked about landscape, but I wanted to talk about geography and the relationship with maps, because maps are so important even in the books. Tolkien himself drew the maps and in a constant back and forth between his writing and the map making. And both in time and in space, there is this traveling, this constant walking, this constant running that the characters are doing from the very beginning of the quest until its very end, and all of this in a circle. So I don't know, could you say perhaps something about this relationship to both time and space, and also about how this influences the characters' development?
Well, I think The Lord of the Rings is a fantasy book, but as much as that, it's a nature writing book and it's a travel writing book. It is about moving through space, and one of the things that is sort of driving the text, the story, is Tolkien's deep interest in like space as something you cross and something that has meaning to cross. And there is so much in the film of the difficulties of travel. It's the sequence early on that keeps them crossing the marshes to get to the hill of Weathertop for somewhere to sit down and have food. And one of the hobbits cries out, "What do they eat when they can't get hobbit?" As he's being bitten by mosquitoes. It is the sequence of trying to get up a mountain and realizing they are going to die if they keep trying to get up the mountain because the weather is not permitting them to pass. And the film makes, I think, more explicitly than the text, makes this a wizard's intervention. There is an evil wizard causing the weather.
Yeah.
Whereas in the text, it's not. It seems more as if the mountain itself is what's rejecting them. But even little details like the moment when Frodo leaves Rivendell and the film script has him turning to Gandalf and asking, "Is it left or right?" Like this question of how do we get where we're going is constantly what moves the characters forward. The necessity of physically moving through this extraordinary and beautiful landscape. And it is a landscape that other people have moved through before. And you have some guidance in the form of, say, Gandalf or Strider, who are both travellers themselves, Boromir, who is a traveller, Gimli the dwarf, who is able to give some advice on what it means to move through the dwarven mine of Moria. But at the same time, a previous journey in this space may not be enough to take you through it this time. And that, I think, is what you were saying about the relationship between time and space. You are moving through a space that has a deep history. The history is not there to help you, and the history will not help you. in the end, you are still going to have to make the decisions that are right for this space right now. The moment in Moria when they are lost, and eventually Gandalf, this great, powerful wizard, is like, well, it smells better this way. Follow your nose. And that's all you can do. So even though the hobbits are traveling through time and space, time has no answers for them. The past has no answers for them. They move under the shadow of the past. I quoted. Sorry, they move under the shadow of the past, but the shadow of the past will give them no assistance. They must make the decision right now whether to go left or right.
Yeah, and they go through the shadow of the past, but the future is a long history of decline. It feels like the whole history of the Middle Earth is one of things always going downwards.
Yes, and this again is from the text. Middle Earth is I mean, this is an old truism. Middle Earth is a post-apocalyptic wasteland. They are moving through the ruins of civilizations that failed again and again. And it's almost like what lasts is the natural world. What keeps coming back and has still vigor and life in it is the natural world. And I think the film does something slightly different with that in the books, because the film's use of the landscape of New Zealand is so beautiful you can't help loving it. Whereas I think in the books the natural world is sadder, much sadder, save only when the hobbits reach Lothlorien, the realm of the elves, where they suddenly emerge into like a world of gold and silver and bright sunlight, which is described as being like an island that's completely out of time and a remnant of a different time. And everything outside that is grey. And the books are really interested in the season and the fact that the whole journey takes place in winter. Whereas the films are very clearly not being filmed in the middle of winter, which, to be clear, I think is a really good choice. I think the extraordinary beauty of New Zealand's landscape is adding a sense of majesty which you might not gain if none of the trees had any leaves and everything was very grey and depressing.
Talking about the role of the seasons, I was struck this time by the similarities between The Lord of the Rings and The Wind in the Willows. I don't know if this is something that makes sense to you.
Oh, I haven't read it recently enough to have an opinion. You tell me what you think.
Well, I don't know. I mean, The Wind in the Willows always has those commentaries about the various moments of the year and the influence they have on the animals that live in the forest. And I was very struck by how this resonates with The Lord of the Rings, and also the sort of storytelling, the tone is very reminding me of that very much.
I think it is that it's another mid-century English nature writer, and they're both coming off that tradition of, in fact, rambling, countryside rambling, which I think both authors did. Kenneth Grahame and J.R.R. Tolkien were great walkers. But it's that experience of the countryside as sort of a real place you move through, and also but a place that is constantly under the effect of the seasons.
Now, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your background in classics and how that might relate to Lord of the Rings. Do you see Lord of the Rings as a story that somehow creates an epic fantasy bridge to more maybe Homeric fantasy or other, Homeric epic, excuse me.
I think Homeric fantasy is not an unreasonable.
I mean, why not?
Actually. Well, I will say this. I think Tolkien is, as anyone of his background and education would be, certainly knows his Greeks and Romans, and he is very intentionable about when he deploys them and when he does not.
Okay.
And he is not deploying Greeks and Romans in large chunks of the Lord of the Rings. When he wants to use or when he wants to invoke that legacy is usually with Gondor and the descendants of the men of Numenor. And here we're into like this idea of there is a great empire with a great legacy, but it has much declined. And it sits, I think, it's very easy to read Gondor as a kind of Byzantium, as a latter-day Roman Empire. with great splendors and nevertheless sort of following 19th century traditions of classical criticism, which were in turn deeply affected by 19th century imperial ambitions by Western Europe in the direction of territories historically held by the Byzantine Empire. So you've got this narrative of decline. This narrative, which of course is something Tolkien's interested in anyway, this idea of a declining world. And he's a deeply conservative thinker and a conservative writer in that he is suspicious of progress, of technology, of change. He thinks the world is getting worse. This is a man who, I think, worldview and life were shaped forever by his experiences as a young man in the First World War, which is a fairly good argument for technology makes everything worse. But his... Sorry, I wander off topic so easily because there's so much I'm interested in. But yes, his interest in epic, I think, is intentionally a Northern European epic, so owing more to, say, the Kalevala than to Homer. But it is where he's borrowing from Greece and Rome. He's doing it to point up both the grandeur and the failure of Gondor.
Interesting.
To add to the list of the things he was suspicious of, I think one could add he was suspicious of women as well, wasn't he?
Suspicious, I think, maybe is not the right word. I'm sure he really talked to women very much. I think maybe that might be the way to put it.
Okay.
Because, in fact, the female characters who appear in Fellowship of the Ring in the book often are lovely and worthy of great praise and admiration. Cut from the film is Goldberry, the wife of Tom Bombadil, but when she appears, she's actually the occasion for Frodo's first spontaneous composition of poetry, which, because it's Tolkien, is very important. So he goes, springtime and summertime and spring again after. So Tolkien has this vision of women as, I think, symbols rather than people very often. And so the characters of Arwen and Galadriel, like Goldberry, each appear in turn as moments of or images of the perfect beauty, which is, if you like, what we're fighting for, what's going to be lost, and what's wonderful and truly worthy of admiration and respect, and we love them very much and they give us food, but we don't talk to them. Arwen has no lines in the book. And here is an adaptational choice, which I think was immensely wise, which is to give her something to bloody well do in the film. In the book, she sits. She sits and people look at her. And by looking at Arwen, they suddenly have visions of the stars. And this is clearly very important and emotional, but it's not going to make an interesting bit of film. And also it's not, I think, cannot ring very true to a contemporary audience as an understanding of what a female character is. It would also have been a huge waste of Liv Tyler to just make it.
Yes. But I find this gender disparity just in terms of not having very many women present in the story interesting in terms of how it echoed into the real life filming. I've read some interviews where the mostly male cast said, oh, those few days when Liv Tyler would be on set, that their behavior would change and that she had a very pacifying effect on the set. So it was interesting to read that.
I do wonder how true that might be to Tolkien's own experiences. Again, I mean, this is a man who lived his life in mostly all-male spaces. He went from British boarding schools to Oxford University in the early 20th century to the trenches and then back to universities. He loved his wife very, very deeply. He certainly knew some female scholars, but this was a man who mostly talked to other men. And what I'm actually thinking of is a history I read of the First World War, which I'm also interested in, which was talking about the experience of being an officer in the trenches and the relief you would sometimes feel leaving the trench and going back to a normal house with a woman in it where you didn't say fuck every other word. And like the experience of being in the all-male society of the trench was an experience of complete disappearance of manners. and of normal behavior and of normal expectations, and the women that they had left behind became almost a symbol of the society they had left behind, of the acceptable behavior that they had left behind for this very muddy and miserable world where you said pass the fucking grease instead of please may I have the butter.
Yeah.
It seems to me that in Middle Earth, the only places that still have some life in them are the places where you do find some women, whereas Mordor, there are no women at all, are there?
As far as we know.
Yeah, we never see
Presumably
anyone.
the orcs are coming from somewhere, but God knows how.
Yeah.
Right. That's true, actually. In Middle Earth civilization, which remains where the women are. But you don't get to talk to them. It's just nice to be able to see them sort of standing there in the distance looking a bit sparkly sometimes. And that, to be fair, I think Tolkien sort of thinks on that and develops it in The Two Towers, which I have not recently reread or rewatched, so I shouldn't talk about it in depth, but I think the character of Éowyn is one of his most interesting.
Yes.
And that is a woman who has more to her than just sitting around looking sparkly.
Yeah.
But actually, I should talk about Galadriel if we want to talk about female characters, because she's in this one.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think Galadriel is interesting in a different way because she gets the narrative of temptation and near fall, and there is the sense that she could become another Sauron. So this is a woman not just with agency, but with threat.
True. Yeah. And speaking of, because we've just mentioned the Fellowship of the Rings as the Fellowship of the Ring as the first installment, do you feel that this is your favorite because it really is the exposition of the story, or how do you feel about the first film in relation to the others?
I think as a child, my favorite was probably Two Towers, but coming back to them as an adult, Fellowship is my favorite because I do feel it is the best adaptation of the three. Okay. And the reason I feel that way is because I think Jackson has a tendency to over-egg the combat. And it's visible even in Fellowship, where in fact the last 50 minutes is mostly one long complex fight sequence. It is more true in Two Towers, where Helm's Deep is expanded from actually a fairly brief sequence in the book to an endless blood. But the thing is as well that it's not even a good adaptation of the good description of medieval siege warfare. Tolkien's work on war, when he does it, is quite good because he's a medieval scholar, he knows his stuff. It doesn't translate very well to film language, so instead you're watching something that doesn't actually make sense. And then the back half of Return of the King is another endless bloody battle. When I say over-eggs the actors, I mean there is some really incredible fight work, stunt work being done. I think actually the undersung star of Fellowship is Lawrence McQuarrie. No, Lawrence McQuarrie. I've got to get his name right. The actor who plays the film-only character of Lurtz, who sort of stands in for all the orcs, gives them a name, a face. And he does some fantastic physical work and some fantastic stunt work. Like, what a villain! And then, of course, there's no equivalent to him in the book because the book doesn't need the powers of evil to be given a face in the same way.
This is actually interesting in relationship to Sauron because he doesn't have a face. He's omnipresent, but he doesn't have a body. What does that say about evil?
I mean, that's a big question. Well, I think Sauron's facelessness is a little bit of a cheat by Tolkien, or rather, he's doing multiple things with it. So one is the depersonalization of evil. Sauron, in his will to dominate, has lost everything that makes him an identity, a unique person, a self. He's just the eye. He's just this desire to perceive and to know and to have power through it. But also, I do think Sauron is present in the story. And I think he is present as a person, as a character, and I think his name is Gollum. Gollum's character exists as he's a dual character, right? He's double. He is both Gollum, the monster, the strangler who wants to kill and steal and take for himself and who cares about nothing at the ring, and he's Smeagol, who is desperately lonely, desperately sad, deeply damaged and traumatized, and hopeful that he can get something back, longing for some kind of relationship with a fellow hobbit, to be in a community with Frodo, and to be loved by him, I think. And Sam calls these two personalities, one a monster and one a hypocrite. He calls them Slinker and Stinker. But Sauron is just Stinker. That's just what he is. That's the Elvish for Stinker. That's his name. And I do think Tolkien is intentionally showing you in sort of big and little what Sauron is. At the end of the day, this grand and terrible and monstrous eye is just this very sad and pathetic little personality that wants and hates and has nothing. And it's even in Fellowship before they've really sort of established what they're doing with Gollum. I think as a film adaptation, you do have the key moment, which is Gandalf, Ian McKellen as Gandalf, telling you he loves and hates the ring as he loves and hates himself, and that is Gollum's story, but it is of course Sauron's central defining trait as well. The ring is himself. The ring is himself, and Sauron thinks about nothing but himself and wants only himself, and there is nothing in him that is worth having.
And as a counter to that, this theme of friendship that runs throughout the film, the idea of fellowship in the very title, it seems something so refreshing to have this example of male friendship in the current culture that we live in which people have thankfully in some progressive circles begun to address. But nonetheless, how do you feel about the representation of friendship, particularly male friendship, in both the film and the book?
I mean, I think The Lord of the Rings is largely about male friendship. I think one of the reasons there are so few female characters is that they're not really relevant to a story about male friendship. And Tolkien was very firm that the books were nothing to do with contemporary allegories for the Second World War or nuclear war, but he was equally clear that they were deeply, not inspired by, but moved by, affected by his own experiences in the trenches. I've both watched the film and read the book in preparation for this, and I'm trying to think about which one I want to talk about first. The friendships that matter most in the books are the friendships of the hobbits, I think. And one of the things that I think had to be cut from an already very long film for time, but I'm sorry to lose it, is some of the depth and complexity of the hobbit friendships. I mean, there's that 17 years of friendship that we had to miss because we couldn't hang around in New Zealand for 17 years waiting for Elijah Wood to get older. But that is, nearly 2 decades of going for walks together, of this closeness and understanding. And one of the best moments in the early part of the book for me is when Frodo, after going very, very slowly, he doesn't want to leave, very, very slowly, finally arrives at a point where he has to leave the Shire, and it's like, oh, I may never see this place again. And his friends go, so we know all about everything, and we are coming with you. And Frodo says, how do you know all about everything? And it's like, because you keep standing around going, oh, I may never see this place again, and we're not stupid. And it's a very funny and sweet moment of your friends are the people who notice, who pay attention to your sorrows and your struggles and the things you're afraid of, and who care and want to be there with you at those moments when you are losing. And I think the film obviously has to compress this down quite a lot. Merry and Pippin get cut all the way down to comic relief for most of Fellowship, and have to be, I think. 9 characters is a lot of characters to have, and I mean, they're not even all the characters there are, but 9 of the Fellowship is a lot of people. So we are given moments of lightheartedness, of drunken singing, and we are given, I think, two key moments of like their closeness to Frodo, which is both when they volunteer to come on the quest with him and say, "Where are we going?" And then at the end of the film, when they fling themselves into the path of the orcs who are trying to find him, so that Frodo can escape. And that is, in film language, trying to tell the same story of long closeness and understanding and willingness for self-sacrifice in this, like, these close male friendships. The film also compresses down, I think, one of the most fun friendships in the book, which is the friendship between Legolas and Gimli, which begins as, well, they just don't like each other. They just don't like each other at all. And there is sort of historical beef between the elves and the dwarves. And there's cultural misunderstandings going on. And I think in the character of Gimli, Tolkien in 1954 is revisiting his dwarves from 1937's The Hobbit. And this some historical events have happened in between 37 and 54. And Tolkien is revisiting some of, I think, the more anti-Semitic portrayals and trying to write a dwarf in a fuller and more interesting way. And a more complex way, and the film just loses all of it. The film just cannot fit Legolas and Gimli's deal into the time it's got. And I think that's a shame, because I think one of the things that's interesting about these sort of male friendships of Fellowship of the Ring is their variety and difference. So you have this sort of very close affection between the hobbits. You have this initially hostile relationship turning to friendship between Legolas and Gimli. And of course, you have one which the film keeps, and most importantly keeps, and I think in some ways feeds some of the conflict of Legolas and Gimli into it, is Aragorn and Boromir. And the film does, the film uses this relationship, this friendship, or in fact, it's almost a love story, I think, between the two of them. A platonic love story, a vassal love story, a fealty love story. It's the movement from Boromir saying Gondor needs no king to, as he's dying, saying, I would have followed you. That transformation of their relationship as Boromir comes to trust that Aragorn is someone he can give his country to and know that his country will be safe and will be loved and will be cared for as Boromir himself loves and cares for his country. I do think it's very beautiful. The death sequence of Boromir is has moved me to tears before.
But this transformation of the characters individually in the Fellowship, I've got the feeling that somehow one could say that it applies to the Fellowship as a whole. I personally saw the Fellowship as one organism with the various members as the organs, the various organs. Is this something you can relate to? And if so, who would be the head and who would be the the various organs in this group?
Well, I think part of what's interesting about the Fellowship is the way that it's avoiding much formal hierarchy. Indeed, as if it did have a hierarchy, it would be quite top-heavy because it had 8 aristocrats and 1 gardener. It's actually, no, 7 aristocrats, 1 wizard, and 1 gardener. And there is, I think, in terms of, I don't know, who would I appoint as head? Well, the answer is Gandalf. Obviously, and then the head gets cut off. And I think some of the sort of floundering in the last 50 minutes of the film is the question of what on earth do we do without Gandalf?
Yeah. And Frodo would be the heart, wouldn't he?
Yes, absolutely. Which makes his decision to leave and go alone all the more painful, but also all the more understandable. He doesn't want to risk these other people whom he cares for.
It's interesting the references you've brought up to World War One and Tolkien, because we've been talking a bit about the idea of trauma, healing from trauma, and the fact that the film came out at a time when I think people were just beginning to really look at questions of trauma studies that came more into the mainstream. And it makes so much sense to connect this to that World War One heritage and all of the survival stories that come from that time.
I mean, I think it's very. You can talk about the themes of decline in Fellowship, but I think it is possible as well to read this as themes of trauma, as the idea of a world that exists but is damaged, and that damage might not be obvious or might not be visible until you are looking for it, and then it is everywhere. And it will never be fully repaired, and you will never get back what you were before. And there is like this decline theme, but I think reading it as a trauma theme, you can almost see like Frodo takes a wound on Weathertop. And in one of, I think, you can see Jackson's horror background here, and it really works. One of the most horrifying sequences of the film, where he puts on the ring, suddenly sees the ring wraiths for what they really are, and it's worse, and then they stab him. And he is wounded in a way that never fully heals. And everything that happens for the entire rest of the film trilogy, it comes in the shadow of that wound, which is, if you like, the end of the delight of that first hour in the Shire. You will never get that back fully, and Frodo never gets it back. And that is the trauma of Middle Earth sort of written on Frodo's body.
You mentioned the origins of Peter Jackson as a filmmaker in the horror genre. How familiar are you with the rest of his work?
I'm not very familiar because I am a coward. So I like Lord of the Rings is about the scariest horror I can watch. I'd be like, oh my god, it's scary.
But tell us maybe a little bit about, we've been very happily reading your books and learning more about your interest in the space opera. Is there a bridge we can make with epic fantasy to the space opera?
Oh,
and
easily.
Perhaps, yes.
I would argue they are the same thing. The natural bridge is called Star Wars, which is both. Or indeed Dune, which is both. A space opera is a fantasy which happens to be set on a backdrop of a grand star empire, but it's still fantasy. And I think actually it tends to, and I certainly borrow from history just as much as any fantasy novel does. I think when you are dealing with science fiction and fantasy, with SFF of all kinds, every author has their sources, their things they're interested in, and the things they're borrowing from. And I personally tend to enjoy it more when authors are borrowing directly from what they care about. So in Tolkien, you can see his medievalism all the way through the work. And it's what makes it so fun. But in the same way, if you consider Jackson as director, you can see the fact that he's a New Zealander all the way through the work that he's doing, and it's part of what gives it its joy and its life, I think. When I'm doing space opera, I confess to be working one step further back. I am borrowing from a long tradition of sci-fi space operas, from Lois McMaster Bujold in particular, her Bill Costigan books, which are in turn, and I know this for a fact, borrowing from Star Trek. And I think the visuals of Star Trek, and especially the original series, which if you watch it now, some of it looks very much, paint and string. Some of it is very unpersuasive as film to people who are used to like a post Lord of the Rings world where they remade effects in ways you can't even begin to imagine. But there is still like a core, like an aesthetic, an aesthetic of perhaps wonder and splendor and distance. And I think distance might be the key, the link, if you like, between the fantasy and the sci-fi mode of space opera. It's that moving through space and time. Hey, we're back there. Is that
the final frontier?
Yes, exactly. That's that shot in the opening of a Star Trek episode where the ship suddenly goes fast and it's going somewhere else, and that is the moment of wonder, the marvelous moment, the possible moment where stories begin.
It's when the humans leave the Shire.
Yes, Exactly, and maybe this Earth is our Shire, this one planet that happens to be actually suitable for us to live on, and we're very lucky to have it. When you take a step outside, and who knows what could be out there.
And that's without forgetting the connection to orcs, which I've recently read in some desperate glory and had a sort of inner chuckle because I thought, well, is that orcs, Lord of the Ring orcs, or orcs Beowulf, or does it matter? Or is it
How
both?
few people actually caught that? No, there is a character in my novel Some Desperate Glory who, to amuse himself, creates holographic worlds. Again, this is out of Star Trek. Imaginary parallel realities which you can move through and adventure in, little role-playing games essentially. And I did them, and I was like, well, this guy's a Tolkien fan. He's just doing Tolkien. So there's a sequence where there is a garden which is intentionally borrowed from the description of the gardens in Minas Tirith in Return of the King. And then our main character finds the place raided by orcs and has to run from them through the streets of the city. I'm like, is anyone going to notice it's Minas Tirith? This is Minas Tirith. That is what we're doing. But I was interested in that book in particular, and I think a lot of people read Tolkien without necessarily getting what he's getting at. That character, certainly, I meant to be misreading Tolkien or misunderstanding him as purely a source of beautiful images and fun fantasy monsters to fight. When in fact Tolkien is interested in in his decline narratives, but also in the spiritual contest that's involved in being part of that decline narrative. It's not just a question of being better at war or good at fighting orcs. It is the emotional strength that Frodo must develop and must draw from his fellowship, from his bonds with others, and especially from his bond with Sam, in order to have the strength to do what no one can do and refuse the ring.
And so what does it say that it's Gollum who actually precipitates the ring in the Mountain of Doom?
Oh, I mean, it's an exquisite moment because, of course, Frodo fails. It's absolutely vital to the story that Frodo cannot do what no one can do. He's not special. And I think actually this is important in The Lord of the Rings is full of these heroic, mythic characters. Aragorn, not least among them. There's this king who's returning. But they don't save the day. It is up to the courage of ordinary, everyday people to do it. So over to Frodo, this representative of essentially 1890s, 1900s England. But he doesn't do it either. He fails. He starts failing pretty dramatically fairly early in Two Towers, and it just gets worse and worse. He would have failed completely if Sam hadn't carried him first through the cave of Shelob and then up the bloody mountain. Sam can't make Frodo give up the ring either. Even that bond of fellowship is not enough. What actually defeats the ring is Gollum's hunger for it, his selfishness. The ways in which Gollum has been made like Sauron. Gollum's betrayal, in fact. So the Sauronness of Gollum is what destroys Sauron himself. The more like Sauron you are, the more evil destroys itself. But also the only reason Gollum is there is that first Bilbo and then Frodo were kind to him. So it's that kindness, that mercy from long, long ago in Bilbo's case. Bilbo could have killed him decades before. But that kindness and mercy of our heroes, plus the selfishness and evil of Sauron and those who have become like Sauron, like Gollum, Stinker, that is what destroys evil in the end.
Can you tell us what you are currently working on? What's coming up next?
I am working on a book that is directly inspired by Homer's Iliad. So I have a classical background, as we talked about earlier, and I am interested in epic, and I am interested in epic heroes and in the limits of epic heroism. I have been calling it the Undead Transgender Patrick Minecraft book. Nobody seems to understand what I mean by that, but it makes perfect sense to me. I'm also interested, I think, in epic in contemporary terms as a a function of video game worlds and of so much of the way that I think the contemporary world, but in fact the post Lord of the Rings films world, accesses this fantastic space of possibility is through the video game. It's through being a guy and running around this space killing orcs or whoever else it is the game is asking you to kill. And I think that's fascinating, and I think it's very strange. So I have some stuff to say about it.
That's exciting. When can we look for the new publication?
Well, first I have to finish the book, and then I have to sell the book, and then I'll tell you.
Okay.
It may be that nobody wants to publish it, although I'm hoping someone does.
I'm sure they will. And in the meantime, we'll follow your website for updates. Is that the best place to look?
That is always the best place to find me. So I'm emilytesh.net, or if you look for me on Blue Sky, I'm emilytesh.net there as well.
Fantastic.
And we like to close the podcast by asking a question, which is as follows. Is there something you wish we had asked that we haven't asked?
No, this was a bloody good talk. I had a nice time.
That's nice to hear.
No, I think you have led me in a wonderful conversation. I've had a great time.
Oh, thank you so much for the generous discussion. We really appreciate it. And we also thank you for the writing that you've done. We've really enjoyed reading your books, and we look forward to more.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to After Images. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and follow After Images podcast on social media.
After